All right, we are live. I welcome to Audio Just Happy Hour. My name is Björkman Benediktsson, author of Step by Step Mixing and founder of Audio Issues and all around audio educator slash mixing engineer. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you aren't on my email list already, please go to mixfinisher.com to get your 7-step mix translation cheat sheet that will help you get better mixes in less time and actually help you make your mixes translate across all speaker systems, or at least that's my process to how I do it. And you may learn something from that. Today, we are going to talk about mix templates and more specifically, my mix template and what's on it and all the plugins, what the buses are, what the routing's like, what's on the mix bus, what's on the master bus, and all those sorts of things. But first, as this is happy hour, I will be having a drink, drinking a Barrio Blonde from Tucson, Arizona. Hint for all of you that are moonlighting as audio engineers but work at a brewery during the day, this space is free for sponsorship. So if your beer is good, get in touch. Cheers, everyone. Let me know what you're drinking in the comments. And if you have any questions or just want to give me a shout out and let me know where you're tuning in from, please do so. If there's any pun intended audio issues, do let me know as we go through the happy hour. So cheers. All right, David Freeman is here. Good morning from Japan. Man, that is quite the country. I love Japan. I went to Japan a few years ago, went to Kyoto and Tokyo, and I absolutely loved it. And it was one of the coolest trips that I've been to. So Chris Kelly is here. I was actually working on his mix this week. Really cool song. Had a lot of fun with it. And David Manto is here. John Owings, Modelo with lime and salt. Nice. Well done. Well done there. So let's just get into it. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to venture into sharing my screen using the software, and we'll see how that goes. So let's do share screen. And can you all see this? Let me know. Hit yes. I can't see your comments now, so please hit yes if you can see this, and then I'm going to stop share, and we're going to do just make sure that everything is visible. All right. Seems like people could see the screen, so let's go back into that. Let's see if there's any questions here. Yeah. Okay. Crossstick can see from Facebook, and Richard can see from YouTube. So I'm going to assume that that applies to everyone. All right, cool. Let's do that again. Share screen, application window there. So this is my mix template. It's just an untitled session because I open it up in Logic from a let's see here. Okay, so you can see my face too, and I bet the resolution is probably not like great, but it might be better. I will try to be articulate about what is going on here. So as you can see here, let's move this over here. Oh, as you can see here, these are all just buses. And let's start at the very, very end here on the right. And throughout, I'm going to go through this template, and maybe every 10 minutes or so, 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how it's going and how fast I'm running through this. And also, I want to make sure that I answer as many questions as I can. So feel free to submit your questions in the comments, whether you're on Facebook or in the chat on YouTube, and so that they are there for me to answer when I come back into the quote unquote studio and can actually see your questions. So write those down so we can go back and forth and I can answer any questions you may have. All right. Okay, so let's get started here. So let's start at the The metering bus. So this is just the master out, where everything ends up, and uh, which is different than the mix bus. The mix bus is actually at bus 32, and that's where the mix that I'm working on goes to. And so that and it doesn't go to a stereo out, because if I use reference tracks, I don't want the reference track to be dirtied up by the mix bus processing that I'm using on the mix that I'm working on. But on the metering bus, so I just call this the metering chain, I have the dynameter, which tells me if things are dynamic, uh, or squashed. Uh, the less dynamic, the more brown the meter gets, and I try to stay away from the brown. I like to be in the green. The loudness penalty plugin for meter plugs as well. I'll put links to all these in the description. So all these plugins that I'm using, or some of these plugins that I'm using, I have a lot of them, but some of the metering plugins might be helpful for you. So I have the loudness penalty plugin that tells me whether my mix is going to be turned down by streaming services, which is great to know, because if you're trying to make your mix super, super loud and it's less and less dynamic, and then it's just going to get turned down by Spotify or iTunes, it's sort of a lost opportunity to conserve dynamics. So I use that to let me know about that. Then I have the span frequency. Frequency analyzer tells me just sort of the general frequency response of everything. And then I have a VU meter. And then one thing that isn't on here but should be, the real great new thing that I have here, which is the SonarWorks reference. So the SonarWorks reference 4 really helps me see or hear the mix as it is when my monitoring is flat, because I measured my room, and as you can see, there's a huge standing wave where I'm sitting in sort of the really, really low end. This is, I think, 45 hertz. So everything that I listen to that is bass heavy is, I always feel like there's too much 45 hertz. That's just this super thick low end. And then I add a bunch of low end in like 80 or 90 hertz here. Whereas if I use reference, I have a flat frequency response, and it helps me make better equalizer decisions. However, I'll add this caveat: if you use it in plugin form, make sure that you deactivate it when you're bouncing out your mix, because it will add this sort of correction to your mix, and it won't sound good. I made this mistake this week when I bounced it out to earbuds and thought, man, my mix sounds terrible, and I thought it sounded great, but or it sounded great in here, and then it sounded terrible when I was checking it on earbuds and stuff like that. But turns out it was just was EQ'd all wonky. So make sure that you turn it off when you're bouncing it out. But super great software here. I was lucky enough to be, well, in full disclaimer, I was lucky enough to be gifted this so that I could use it and see how it works for me. And so I highly recommend this, as long as you make sure that you're using it in the right spots. All right, so that's the metering. Are there any questions on that? All right, guess not. So let's go to the mix bus here. As you can see, I have a lot of plugins on the mix bus. I don't necessarily use all the use all these plugins. So what do I have here? I have gain, because if for some reason I'm mixing too hot into the mix bus after mixing for a while, I can just turn the gain down so that it's not being crushed by all my mix bus processing. When you're doing 32-bit floating point processing, you can just turn the gain down and it'll be fine. So I have gain here. I have a Saturn, which is I have a tube saturation and a warm tube here. This is on this on this preset, but there's plenty of presets here. Sometimes I just have it on a tape, just a straight tape without any different bands here. And then I have a pull tack, which has slight boosting and slight cutting at 100, and then it has a little bit of boost at about 10K. I feel like I stole this from Greg Wells. It just creates a little bit of a smiley face, which is, makes for a nice curve overall in the mix. Then I have the F6, which is sort of a multi-band dynamic EQ sort of thingamajig. I use this very rarely, but it's still on my mix bus because I tend to activate it and deactivate it and see if it makes the mix sound better. I have the Aphex aural exciter, and I use this very rarely, just if if it's really lacking brightness. I have the Greg Wells Mix Centric, which I use a lot. I'm a big fan of it. It's just, if its intensity is on, very little here, and it just turns it on. And assuming that you've done a good job with levels and panning, and you have a good rough mix going, this just kind of adds that a little bit of like polished touch at the very, very beginning, which is great because it means that you get a nice big win at the beginning of the mix, so you can make it makes you feel better, and you can continue onward. So this, as you can see here, there's 2 slots that are free, and I do this because I mix a lot of singles, and I also want to make sure that anything that I send to an artist is quote unquote mastered already, so that it sounds mastered, so that when they compare it to something else or when they're listening to it, it isn't quiet, because uh, I don't subscribe to the notion that you have to send a mix and then that mix should be mastered. If that mix will be mastered by somebody else, I will send the unmastered mix to that person. But if they are getting a mix from me, they are getting a mastered mix so that they can hear how it sounds as a record. And what I have here, so these 2 free slots here, they basically um, they basically divide my mix, or my mix bus processing, from my master bus processing. And what I have here is the Abbey Road, what's it called? TG mastering chain. I really love this tape equalizer module. And this little limiting module is great because, especially if you just put it in 50%, so you do parallel compression on your entire mix just with this little knob. And then these EQs are great, and this filter I rarely use, but just to get that tiny little polish and extra pro sheen, this is great for that. And then I have the Pro Q3, which has just a permanent filter at 32 hertz, and it has a filter at 75 hertz just on the sides. So it's a mid-side EQ, and this filter is filtering out all the low end from the sides, and it's just taking all the low end into the middle. And then I have the Pro MB, which is just Fab Filter's multi-band compressor. This is a relatively new plugin to me, and I'm still learning to use it. But as with all of Fab Filter's products, this is very, very powerful, very, very versatile. And I use it mostly for mastering. I haven't really delved too deep into it when it comes to mixing. Then I have the Gutfoss, which is how you really pronounce it, but nobody's able to pronounce it that way. Gutfoss, the Icelandic waterfall, is a beautiful automatic EQ that does something that I couldn't tell you. If you think mastering is voodoo magic, this is the voodoo doll. You just turn these knobs and then you do bypass, and then if it sounds better, you're on the right track. You tweak it a little bit more. I don't rely on this plugin because it's too unpredictable, and I'm too stupid to know exactly what it does. But it is great in a pinch if you just want to add, like, it sort of tends to open things up and brighten things up, and just creates a more professional master. And then from there, it goes into Ozone, and it's permanently on the limiter only. So it's as you can see, everything is deactivated except the Ozone limiter. And this module is deactivated, this module is deactivated, but it's only the limiter is at ceiling and -1, which is the recommended streaming ceiling. and I mix into this limiter. I don't use the threshold until maybe the very, very end if I need to. And so what this means is if I'm mixing and the thing and I try not to be hitting the limiter at all while I'm mixing. But if I get carried away and I am mixing way too hot and the mix starts sounding smaller and smaller and smaller, I know that it's because all of the compressors on the mix bus and this limiter are probably squeezing that mix and making it smaller. At which point I go back to my gain here and I turn the gain down so that it's not hitting as hard. So that's a little bit of mix bus processing. Let me close these all these plugins and let's look at some questions, see if anybody has any questions on the mix bus and master bus. All right, let's go through this. Name of what Crosstick asks, name of that plugin again. Which one? I can't see when you posted it. So that analyze. Oh, the SonarWorks reference 4. It's a cool one. Cannot see the plugins, can't see the mix text. Yeah, the mix text is not, it's not great. I realize that, but I hope you at least get the idea of what's going on. We can't see the plugins. Hello room. Well, this is pretty useless. Well, sorry. Nice Santa picture though. I like that. So you can't see anything. That's okay. Let's see if I can do this. Is that better at all? The open plugins are not opening. Oh, that's interesting. Let's go. Let's see here. Share screen. Okay. Can you see these plugins? Yes, no, maybe. Woo. Okay, great. Okay. Do you guys want me to go through that again? Because I'd be happy to go through it again if you guys want, because I want you to get yeah, it's a little bit hard to read because the resolution of the live stream, there's nothing I can do about that. But let's yeah, so that's so Marcelo says yes, but even full screen text is hard to read. Well, that's why you should be listening to what I have to say, because I'm telling you exactly what the plugins are. You don't necessarily have to see the plugins in order to appreciate what's going on. So they're a little pixelated, writing down the name of the plugins as you went along. Okay, so let's go back to I do have a list of your Mixbus plugins. I guess I can make a list of them, but let's go back to the template, and I will see if I can do, well, I definitely can't share. Yes, we can see. Well, okay. Okay. So, whoa. All right. So let's see if I can do this, then I might be able to see your oh, there we go. Okay, now I can see your chat too. Let's do that. Okay, so let's go back through the mix bus. So the mix bus has gain. Can you see the gain plugin? Yes, no, maybe. Hey, Crosstick, can you see the gain plugin here? Can you see the Saturn? Can you see the Pultec? Okay, great, great, great. So this is the mix bus. So it's gain, saturation, the Fab Filter, Saturn saturation, or any saturation plugin. The names of the plugins isn't super important. It's more what they are and what they're used for. Okay, they're all popping up now. way to go. This is great. Okay, and having the chat here on the right is great. Um, so gain plugin is just used to make sure that the gain is, if it's going too hot into the bus or into the mix bus, then I can turn it down in case it's hitting the limiters or the compressors too much. There is a saturation plugin here. Usually use a tube or a tape saturation here. Using the FabFilter Saturn is my go-to. I have the Pultec EQ that has a little bit of a smiley face. It has just 100 hertz boost and a cut actually, and then it has a sort of smiley at over at 10K. Can you reduce your screen resolution while streaming? Well, I'm already running pretty low on screen real estate here, so just listen to the things instead of watch. Then we have the Waves F6, which is just an automatic or a dynamic EQ, which is good in a pinch, but I don't use all the time. And then the Aphex Exciter, which I tend to use if things are super dull, but I tend to use it more as a mixing thing. And then the Greg Wells Mixcentric is my go-to mix bus plugin because sometimes it gives me a really great sort of instant big win. Let's try the screen resolution trick here, just real quick. That's so big. Is that better? How's that? Let's see if that works better. Okay. Clay, do you see, is it better now? Sweet. We figured it out. Look at that. The power of community coming together, helping out the teacher. Maybe a larger, man, you guys are super picky. All right. I'm not going to also enlarge. This is it. Just listen and watch. All right. So this is the mix bus processing. You don't need to see the cursor. From there, the mastering is this tape equalizer and this parallel compression / limiter thing. I love using that. We did it, kids. Yeah, Chris. Thank you. And then as I told you before, there's just a permanent filter at 32 hertz, and then there's a filter at 75, which I tend to move around depending on the bass information in the mix, and it's only cutting in the sides, and that just reduces all the low end information to the middle of the mix. Then it goes to the multi-band compressor. I have this mastering start preset. That's just this 3-band mastering preset that I stole from Ian Shepard of Production Advice, and it just glues things together a little bit. There's not a lot of, I have to really drive it hard in order for it to compress a lot because the range is only about 3 dB. So I don't even let it compress more than 3 dB. And then it goes into the Voodoo Magic Gutfuss, and then it goes into my ozone. And I just have the ozone elements because I have the FabFilter stuff too. And I mix into a limiter that's permanently set at a -1 dB ceiling. And then from there, where do you want to go next? All right, let's go to the drums. So I have a, so basically when I mix, I import all the tracks and then I do a rough mix of the tracks and then I bus everything. I try to simplify as much as I possibly can into the template. So if there's 2 kick drums or layered kick drums, I tend to route it into the kick bus and then into the snare bus, same thing. And then there's a tom bus and then an overhead bus. And these 4 buses then route to the drums, and the drum bus routes to the mix bus. Make sense? So let's go through the drum bus. The drum bus has the Schoeps Omni channel. which is as close to the mixing with 5 plugins plugin that I can find. So it has saturation, it has de-essing, which is basically just multi-band compression here. It has an EQ, and it has a three types of compression here. And then it has this lovely little insert that I can add more stuff to. For instance, if I wanted to add a delay, I could add the H delay in here, and then I would just pull the dry wet knob all the way to maybe 10-20%, depending on how wet I wanted it. And then I can add an extra depth as an insert. All right. Any questions on that? And then I have vitamin, and that sort of has this sort of a little bit of punch um, in the low end, and then a little bit of high end, and some in the mids, and then I tweak this depending on obviously what the information is that's coming into these plugins. Yeah, Andrew Sheps is definitely one of my favorite mixing engineers, so I tend to watch all of his videos that I can find. Then he goes into a C4. I always like having a multi-band compressor on drums if if it if it needs sort of gluing together. And then I have the CLA mixdown that I experiment with on occasion. It's also on my parallel drum bus here, so we'll go to that. Then the overheads just have some analog summing, the NLS channel. It has an EQ that just has a filter already set to 250 or so, yeah, to 251.57. And because if I'm doing rock drums or anything of that nature, I do cool. Thank you for letting me know. I didn't realize that. So a big comment over the screen. So you might have that right. So I can't see what you're seeing, so please let me know if there's anything off. So yeah, this is a filter. So I just take that out of the drums if I'm mixing rock drums. I tend to want to focus the kick and snare information just on the kick and snare buses themselves. And then it has the CLA drums. Tend to use that on occasion. I like using these things as just sort of quick fixes or quick wins. And then the tom bus is kind of fun. I haven't had a good chance to use it. It has a permanent filter at 60. It has CLA drums on it too. It has the MV2 compressor, which I really, really like on drums. It has the one knob wetter. So basically, if I'm trying to add, I just want the toms to sort of be bigger than necessarily the rest of the kit. I can just use that as an insert. And then I have a pitch shifting plugin here. And this is just something that I picked up from Andrew Sheps just to add some depth to it. And then on the kick, I have the Pro Q3, an EQ. I have a Pultec EQ too. I have an 1176 compressor. I have the R bass, which is a sub bass enhancer, which I really, really like on kick and bass. And then I have the enveloper with Logic. The enveloper is basically a transient designer. I tend to use it a lot if there's too much sustain or too much attack in a signal. A transient designer really does come in handy. So cool. And then on the snare, just a EQ compression. This compressor on the snare is my go-to. Really, really like using this one. And then I have a VEQ, and it just has a permanent sort of high-end boost, a high mid boost and a high-end boost, because I often find that if you add a little bit extra 10K on a snare, it just brightens up and pushes out. Felipe Oliveira is asking, did you use Cubase? I think you might be confusing me with Chris Salim that I was on Happy Hour with him the other day. He uses Cubase. He's a Cubase power user. And then from there, I have the sends. Any questions on the drums, in general. All right. So from there, I have a few different parallel buses for the drums. I have the snare stretch, which I use to add an extra layer of depth to the snare. Uh, Clay Lahat asked, "Do you like to boost the 250 hertz on the snare?" I do really like thick snares, so yeah, a boost in 150 to 250 is not uncommon. And in the snare stretch depth reverb, I have a channel EQ that's just taking out the lows and the highs. I have the Sound Toys little plate that just is really, really nice sounding reverb for the snare. I also have the CLA drums in case I want something a little bit different. I tend to use the compressor and the reverb a lot. I don't even know why this gate is on. And then I have, in case none of that works, I have the trusty Valhalla room that just has it's set to gate drum room, but then I can just modify the parameters depending on how big I want stuff to sound. And then I have a drum reverb, which is again EQ'd. Lows and the highs are out. I have the Valhalla drum room, but I also have the IRL from Waves, which is just an impulse response. So there's a lot of different sounding rooms in here that I can, depending on the type of sound that I want, um, I can just find that in here. And then I have the parallel drum compressor, which I use almost always, depending on, well, maybe not always in the sort of softer sounding songs, folkier songs. And obviously nothing that has drums in it. It doesn't have drums in it, but it has the UID, just an 1176. It has a channel EQ, just taking that low end out in case, because it tends to build up a lot of low end. And then it has the CLA mix down. And I really like these glue and drive knobs. And then drums dirt is something that I'm experimenting with, and that's something that I also stole from Andrew Sheps. And it comes in handy, but I haven't gotten the hang of it yet. And as you can see here, I have buses, the sends already set up. So as soon as I've gotten a good mix going on the drums, I can just immediately send stuff to these buses and tweak that in order to get a quick drum sound going fast. Any questions on the drums or the parallel drum buses? Alrighty then, let's go to the bass. So in the bass, I have a lot going on actually. The Bass Forge, which is a Joey Sturgis Tones plugin. This is just a bass. Actually, I have a few different bass amps. So depending on the sound of the bass, I use a bass amp to. uh, okay, cool. So I have a few different variations and a few different options for bass amps. Because if it's a dull bass or it's just a DI and it needs a little more, needs to be more lively or whatnot, then I like having these options. And the Joey Sturgis ones is the newest. It has like a preamp here. It has graphic EQ. Basically, this is how you would just sculpt the tone using this plugin. I have the Ampeg head, and then I actually just have the bass amp modeler in Logic that I tend to I try to find a good tone for. This was my go-to, but now I'm more and the Ampeg usually works, but sometimes it gets a little bit thick. And the Bass Forge I'm still getting the hang of, but it's super versatile and really enjoy using it. So used it on Chris Kelly's mix, I believe. And then I have the R bass. And as you can see, I have the R bass on the bass, and I also have it on the kick. And they are not always, not always, they're usually not set to the same frequency so that they're not competing with each other. And then I have an EQ, which isn't doing anything other than what I want it to do in the moment. It doesn't have a set preset or an EQ curve or anything like that. I have a C4, which sometimes there's too much low end. Sometimes I can just buy it. For instance, if it's too muddy, I tend to do this a lot. So just from like 150-ish, this is 140 to about 250, just to tame this sort of muddy, boomy area here. And that it can be super, super helpful. And then I have the CLA3A, which is a great guitar and bass compressor. And I just try to, there's not a lot to it. You just tweak it and you try to make sure that the gain reduction is at what you want it to be and that it sounds good. And then I have this compressor, whose main function is really just to be a sidechain compressor to the kick. So I don't use it for any other function than to be a ducker. And then from there, I have the parallel bass chain, which has a channel EQ, a saturator, and this pedal board. So pedal board. So if I'm looking to shape or create a design, a tone of the bass, I have all these fun effects that I can try to put on, and I do it in parallel. It's not uncommon, and you can see this on another YouTube video. And you can see this on another YouTube video where I talk about parallel bass, using the parallel bass. And it's not uncommon for me to have something like a crunchy amp with the drive all the way up. And then maybe there's some ridiculous EQ curve like this. Obviously, EQ curves will always look weird, but that's not really what you should be going by. You should be going by how they sound. So let's imagine that the parallel bass is, so in this case, it's just saturating the highs, the mids and the high mids, and it's completely cutting out the lows so that helps the bass cut through on smaller speakers, for instance. And it adds a little bit of growl to it if you're looking for that sort of thing. All right. And then the pedals, as I just said before. And then it has bus 21 and bus 6 is, so as you can see here, I have a setup 3 different types of reverbs. I have a room reverb, a plate reverb, and a hall reverb. And these sends are all set up here so that, and it just has, a studio bass, like a small room, and then it has a medium plate, and then it has a impulse and then it has an impulse response for a large hall. So if you're thinking sort of like in a three verb feel, so this is small, medium, and large. So you can sort of shape and build your mix, build your spaces around that. And then it goes, the bass has this bus 6, which is random, and I just have one bus that's just random stuff. Usually this is distortion or crazy effects or things like that. So not too much to talk about there. This is more like a creativity knob than anything else. And then as you can see, all of these buses go bus 25 and 26. And all of the buses, the bass, the guitar buses, the keys and the synths, the solos, the lead vocals and the backup vocals, they're all going to those parallel chains. And that is an optical compressor, an LA2A, and an 1176. And I just mix in with those, which is very similar to what both Michael Brower and Andrew Sheps do. And I find that it really helps make the mix louder, while not squeezing it from the top, but adding more power in from the bottom. And what I mean by bottom is, I don't mean by low end. I mean from the bottom of the waveform up. You're not squeezing the mix by pushing it up against the limiter. You're adding more information into the mix, so that it's more stuff is in parallel, so that there's maybe less of a difference between the peak and the peak and trow, or what it's called, and So it just adds a lot more thickness to the overall mix. And then in the acoustic guitar, I tend to get a lot of guitar and instrument based music. So I have an acoustic guitar here. Sometimes this just gets renamed as clean guitar and distorted guitar, depending on what is going on. And in the acoustic guitar one, I have the CLA Unplugged, the TG12345, the EMI console, basically Crest Factor. That's it. Thank you, Clay. And I really like this plugin on acoustic guitars because it just makes the acoustic guitar bigger. The spread knob is awesome. I tend to not use this compressor too much. It's usually on off, or I might take a preset, let's say, bold and beautiful acoustic guitar, and it's on compressor. I usually take that off, um, and use a different compressor. And then the noise should be down. I hate the noise stuff. I already add plenty of noise with other plugins, so I don't need my channel strip plugins to add extra noise. And then I have the Sheps Omni channel, which is just a go-to workhorse. Really, really great. As you can see, um, settings built in because I just tend to mix this from the start. There's not even there. Yeah, there's just a drum group preset here. And then the electric guitar has a lot more stuff, but it's a lot of it is just here again. Do we have Joey Sturgis tones? We have 2 guitar amp modelers, and then we have the Renaissance Axe. I really like the Renaissance series. I think the Renaissance plugins were one of the first Waves plugins that I had that I bought, that I used a lot because they're so simple. They're so great to use. And then I have the CLA 3A because that's just a good guitar and bass compressor. And then again, I'm starting to use these Joey Sturgis plugins, but I also have actually, I'm going to take this out. I hate this plugin. I have a Marshall amp if I need it, and I have the CLA guitars, which is a surprisingly good go-to a guitar plugin. Any questions on any of this so far? Let me know. I can see the comments there on the right. And then we get to keys. Keys can be keyboards, piano, anything of that nature. And then synths can be all sorts of other stuff. And a lot of this is just catch-all stuff. If I have a piano, excuse me, if I have a piano, I'll add that here. If I have synthesizers or things like that nature, I'll put that in here. But these are also just any of these can be renamed and used for something completely different at a moment's notice. I just want to have the option to use to have the buses ready so that I can stay in the zone, stay creative, and have fun with it. All right, so in the keys, I have a filter already set up at 100 hertz, which is maybe a little bit too much, because if they're hitting the low keys on a piano, and then I have the CLA Unplugged, I have the Vitamin, and I have the V comp. I really like the V comp on excuse me. I really like the V comp on keys and keyboards because there's just something about it that just compresses the mids in such a way that it pokes through, and I really like that. I tend to put, if you think of the bass being dominant in sort of the lows and the low mids, and then the guitars being maybe from maybe the body of the guitar is like 250 to 500, and then the attack of the guitar is at 1K. I tend to put the piano in 6 to 800, and this compressor seems to push that range. And then I tend to also, actually, let me add. I'm gonna just add this to the preset real quick because it's really great to just be able to boost this right here, or 800, 600. So tend to do that. Let's deactivate that. And then the same thing with the synths. It has the CLA Unplugged, It has a vitamin, and it has an R compressor. It's just an R comp, super simple, just in case there's compression that's needed. Nothing fancy. If I want some analog modeling stuff, or I feel like it needs a fancy compressor, um, I can always move and copy stuff from the underlying bus, or the buses that are around. Because moving the V comp from here to there takes a lot less time than trying to go into your plugins, scrolling down, trying to find it, going here and there. So if you're working, if you're doing a mix and your mix takes you 2 to 4 hours or something like that, then, and you're always trying to find plugins, you're just really wasting a lot of time searching for plugins. I tend to want to have everything loaded and set up so I can easily move things around and activate and deactivate depending on what I think it should, it suits, what's the mix. Oh man, my English is not great. So you get the point. And Alvarez is hi from Mexico. Hola. And let's continue on here. The buses are all more or less the same. So there's the room reverb, there's the wider, oh, we'll get to the wider. So there's these two things here that are called wider and brighter, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then the solos is just if there's a guitar solo or a piano solo or anything like that, and I want to have a little more flexibility, I have the CLA guitars for guitar solos, and I have the CLA unplugged for other things, sometimes together, usually not though. It's just that if there's a rhythm section and then one breaks into a solo, I might want to mult that track and send that separately to the solo knob or the solo bus. And then on the lead vocals, I have channel EQ, just has 100 hertz cut. I have the RVox, one of my favorite vocal compressors. So simple, so easy to use. I have the Howard Benson vocals from Joey Sturgis, which I really enjoy. I just got this plugin and I'm trying to figure it out. It is a beast and it has a lot of really cool stuff going on for it. So the jury's still out, but so far, so good. CLA vocals after that. Pro De-esser from Fab Filter. And then Greg Wells voice centric. Backup vocals are more or less the same. The channel EQ, filtered. CLA vocals and RVox, and then Nectar from Isotope that I tend to use very rarely, but it's there on the plugins. It's there on the preset if I think that if I want to try it out. And then from there, I go into these two vocal buses, which is the automatic double tracking bus, which just has a stereo delay at 29 milliseconds and 21 milliseconds. And that just adds a tiny little bit of depth, a little automatic double tracking love, just adds a little bit of thickness to it. But I also have the real ADT one, which adds a little more character. Sometimes that's great if you want this type of sound, but it doesn't always work. And then I have the doubler that also sometimes works, but sometimes doesn't. And then I have the Maserati harmonics, which I use very rarely, but is on the preset or is on the template. And then the vocal space is basically, I have a room, a plate, and a hall. And then if I want to add a specific type of space to the vocal, I use the vocal space. So the vocal space has a CLA vocals, but I don't usually use that. But I have a stereo delay and I have an impulse response for whatever space that I want. And then sometimes I might put, as you can see, there's an empty slot here. I can add, I can just put the reverb in front of the delay in order to get delayed reverbs, or I can put the reverb after the delay in order to diffuse the repeats from the delay. So I use, depending on the feel of the song, obviously, they're all going to be different. And then I have a stereo delay bus, which has the H delay, but I really just like the good old Logic stereo delay because you can, it's very versatile. Then I have a compressor on there too in case I want it, and also in case I want to side chain the delay to the vocal so that when the vocal is actually singing, the compressor is maybe compressing that delay down so that it is not in the way of the vocal, and then when the phrase stops, the vocal the delay kind of comes blooming back up. So that's why that compressor is there. Then I have a mono delay, which is just a tape delay from Logic or from Apple, I guess. And then the wider is that's just I tend to put vocals on that a lot, and then some instruments. I don't tend to put drums on there, and I don't tend to put yeah, and percussion and rhythm instruments and or bass on there either. But the wider bus has a compressor on the way in, and the S1 imager set to the Pensado 3D width. And then I just have these sends set up. So this is bus 24. As you can see, bus 24 is just all down this part here and then right here. And then brighter is just the oral exciter and an R compressor and an EQ to take out the low end. And then the random we've already talked about, and then the optocomp and the CLA. The CLA is basically, I was gonna try to find, I have the CLA mix down on here, and it just has the glue all the way to the top. I use it rarely. And then I have EQs here in case I want to EQ or add something back. This is the Pultec from Logic. I have never used it, but I should maybe try it out. And then I have the VEQ here, just in case I want to add, a frequency to poke out or something like that. Somebody asked, Clay asked, I want to see how you load multi-tracks into your template. So I usually get, let's see here. I usually get multi-tracks just in a zip file, which are nicely labeled, and so that I can just take them all and push and copy them in here, and then they'll just be like, it'll just be kick. Let's imagine that we have an 8-track song. Kick, snare, overheads, bass, guitar, lead, vocals, backups. So typical. So I would just drop them in here, and then I would do a rough mix on these faders first. So I've maybe moved things down a little bit like that. And then, let's imagine, because I'm not going to stream this over the internet right now, this should be a stereo track. Bass here, guitar, let's say guitar like that, guitar lead right there. Piano is just in the center and the stereo or something like that. Vocals and backup vocals. So let's imagine this is a good balance. And I start with just balancing the tracks. And then if I feel like the tracks are sounding great and I can just put them in the preset, then I would just bus these to the kick, the snare, et cetera, and then the vocals. You get the point. However, if I want to do some track like mixing on the tracks, I will usually try to get a good rough mix going just with the Sheps Omni channel, because with the Sheps Omni channel, I can basically add saturation. I rarely use gates. I can add multi-band compression with using the de-essing module, and I can add EQ compression and then some depth using maybe a delay with 10% wet. And that's about it. And then most everything happens on these buses. And then Jorge asked, what effects do you put on the master? We went over that already, but in broad terms, it's saturation, or Saturn Pultec EQ, a dynamic EQ, an exciter if I want it, which is very rare, and the mix centric, and then I have the Abbey Road mastering chain, the Fab Filter Pro Q3, the Fab Filter Pro MB, and the Gullfoss, and then I mix into a limiter. So that's it for the mix template overall. Let's see if we can see if I can go back to everything and stop sharing and see if yeah. So could you provide name again and the tool used to adjust monitor feed to account for problems at your listening station? Sonar Works reference 4. So let's do this. See if this will work. Seems like there. Now I'm not frozen. Can you all see me? Is this was this helpful? Let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to take any questions about it. Let's see if anybody's had any questions on the chat so far. We have a long list of questions here, or a long list of feedback about the image quality being not good, but I hope it has been fixed. So cool. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. If you're not on the email list, go to mixfinisher.com and download my mix translation cheat sheet. I'll hang out for just a second if you have any questions about that. But yeah. Yeah, so Clay asks, so do you not put the audio files onto your template tracks at all? No, I route them into the onto the buses. So almost everything is an auxiliary bus. So yeah. And then Crossstick asks, once we find good reference tracks, any option sources other than iTunes that provide higher quality versions? Well, CDs, unfortunately, are still a good way to do it. I think you can find high quality FLAC somewhere, but I don't really have a good answer to that, unfortunately. Justine asks, this was fantastic. Are you keeping this up so we can watch it from start, please? Yes. This is just going to live on the YouTube channel and on the Facebook. Well, you're on Facebook, so it's going to be on the Facebook video. And the high quality video was also recorded, so that's one thing that you can do if you want to see this video maybe with a slightly better resolution. It is available in the Insiders community, which is let's see here, let me put a ticker here so you can join Audio Issues Insiders, which is my membership community that helps musicians and producers make better sounding music and helps them release their music and finish their mixes. But you can watch this happy hour live, this mix template training whenever you want on Facebook. So cool. Any other questions you have for me? If not, I'm going to finish this beer, I guess. Well, cheers. First of all, hope you're all having a drink or something at least. Oh, Marcelo asks, so your default template doesn't include slots for the multi-tracks. Those are added once you get the project. Yes. So I usually get the audio files and then I just import them into the mix template, and Logic just creates those audio tracks. And then I do mixing on the faders there, and then I bust things to the template. That's one way to do it. There's multiple other ways to do it. If you are producing, recording, mixing, and mastering everything yourself, maybe you have an even more extensive template that includes audio track presets as well, an audio track template too. But I usually just get the audio files and import them in there. Sent an email, David. Oh yeah, so I have it right here. So David asks, he has two questions. How does the mixing strategy change for programmed drums that end up being one track, i.e. no separate tracks for kick, snare, cymbals, etc.? So it's a good question. I tend to mix those things the same way I would mix a drum bus. So I'll cut the mids, but I'll be more subtle and more strategic on like how much I'm cutting or boosting. and I'll cut the mids, I'll compress, I'll add saturation, and then parallel compression and reverb. And maybe the reverb is EQ'd a little bit more so that it's not adding a ton of the low end and stuff like that. So, and then he also asked, I have an old tape straight from the mixing board from a concert back in 1995, back when I was 10 years old, and it sounds awful. Punk metal music. Bass is overwhelming, drums are not bad except dull cymbals. Vocals are quiet, guitar all but inaudible. I've tried some EQ with minimal results. Is there a way to salvage this to make it at least bearable to listen to for the purpose of relearning the parts and re-recording it? So I'm assuming let me know. So is this, so this is just one track, or is this in multi-track form? So when you say tape, is it like on a 24 track reel, or is it just a 2-track tape? Because if you just have a 2-track file, then you may be able to do interesting cleanup using RX by Isotope, and you may be able to do some mastering, but it's never going to be great, but it might be salvageable to the point where you can re-record the parts. So it's one track cassette. Yeah. So it's I would try to do as much noise cleanup as possible, and then try to get super surgical on the EQ in order to bring out the parts that you really need to hear. Uh, because in this case, it's really just your goal is to learn how it sounds so that somebody can, you know, re-record it, right? So you just really need to be able to hear what instruments are there and what they're playing. So EQ is probably going to be your friend, as well as maybe something like RX by Isotope. Um, oh yeah, and Marcella asks, there's a delay from when we send comments to when you see them. Yeah, so I realize that. So I am familiar with awkward silences, and I'm perfectly fine with them. So that's fine. So hope that was helpful, David. Let me know if you have any further questions, and I'm gonna stick around for about 2 more sips, and then I'll call it a day. See, this is an awkward silence, not so awkward. All right, guys. I hope that's been helpful. That'll be it for the day. If you want to join me on the inside with the insiders community, go to audio-issues.com/insiders. There's even more mixing help there. A lot of mix walkthroughs of various genres, and just a really cool community where you get feedback on your mixes and get to hang out with uh, very cool people all over the world making cool music and cool records. So hope this was fun, and I hope to see some of you on the inside. Once again, I'm Björkfin from Audio Issues, author of Step by Step Mixing, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Cheers.